Our montage editing sequence was inspired by a similar driving montage from the game Virginia. In Virginia, you embody the role of an FBI agent whose latest investigation often necessitates driving around rural Virginia as you search for clues regarding the disappearance of a young boy. Because Virginia is unique due to its cinematic usage of editing, during these driving scenes, the shots often cut forward in time and space so you don't have to watch the entirety of the distance traveled, in a way that's reminiscent of montage editing in cinema. For those unfamiliar with the term, montage editing is a technique in film editing that stitches together a succession of short shots in order to condense space, time, and information into a brief sequence. As a prototype, we created a sequence similar to the one that's used in Virginia, where while you are driving down a road, the environments, such as a well-lit daytime road to a forest at night, and the songs on the radio change to indicate the passage of time. Given that the kinds of edits found in these sequences are mostly hard cuts, our major goal for implementing montage editing in VR was to make sure the transitions were not jarring for the guest. Since guests will view this experience from a first-person perspective, we wanted the positions of the near space objects to be consistent while the environment was changing, in order to keep the guests grounded even though the environment around them was in flux. To do this, we intentionally made the car as the reference frame in our driving montage sequence, so that the base action of driving remains through different time and locations. Fortunately, we found that when playtesting this transition, the actual cuts themselves didn't prove to be jarring for people who tried our prototype, although they did note that there was a bit of lag in cutting from one environment to the next, which we subsequently worked to minimize. Due to the success of this montage editing prototype, we also wanted to test if quick, hard cuts were possible in VR with the absence of a grounding object like the car. While we didn't build a prototype for what we later termed our quick cut sequence, we did build a quick cut sequence for our final product. This quick cut sequence in our final experience was also inspired by Virginia, especially during a sequence where the protagonist of the game imagines a future where she informs on a long list of fellow agents, and time passes quickly before her eyes through a quick series of cuts. This sequence uses the same environments and spaces, such as your boss's office and the FBI bullpen, but mixes some of the details up just enough to convey the feeling that change is happening. In essence, montage editing, but without any grounding object to pull you from one scene to the next. In our final experience, we created a similar sequence where you, the protagonist, watch your relationship deteriorate over a period of time, and in doing so, showcase a series of quick cuts in between two specific environments, the open road and your apartment, to show this passage of time. We hoped that since quick cuts had worked well enough for our montage editing prototype, that it could extend to this sequence as well. While in film, these kinds of edits are both very basic, moving the camera from one position to the next, and often unnoticeable. In VR, quickly changing position feels like teleportation and is disorienting to the guest, especially since the camera in VR is the guest's FOV and where they decide to look. Whisking them away to another scene without warning proves to be very uncomfortable. So while quick hard cuts in our montage editing sequence worked relatively seamlessly, in the absence of a grounding object, these quick hard cuts do not work quite as well. To fix this sequence, we did the following. We removed the driving interludes in the sequence, thereby containing the action to one scene in the apartment. From the lessons we learned with our gaze interaction triggered cuts, we decided to change the quick edits in this sequence to softer, fast dissolves where your girlfriend, from within the room, moves farther and farther away from you. This also solved our issue, on the storytelling front, of getting across the right emotional affect, as with the addition of the dissolves and the confinement to one location, playtesters now remarked that this sequence allowed them to feel both the emotion of the scene and digest the edits seamlessly. Additionally, in this altered sequence, we also incorporated details from the famous montage scene in Citizen Kane. In the film, Kane's first marriage devolves, which is represented visually through a series of edits where his wife moves from being positioned right next to him at a small, intimate dinner table to being across the room from him at a massive yet alienating dining table. So in summary, here are a few takeaways we learned about executing montage editing in VR successfully. It is incredibly important to have one relatively large grounding object if your montage requires quick, hard cuts, as the guest will be uncomfortable and disoriented without one. In the absence of a grounding object, you are much more limited as to what you can achieve with a montage. Neglecting to use a grounding object for us meant confining the action to a single environment and replacing hard cuts with softer dissolves to make the sequence more easily digestible. Feel free to play around with both our montage editing and quick cut parameters yourself in our cutting-edge VR transition tool on GitHub. Link in the description below.